all know a guy who only occasionally shaves for big occasions, and it's because that occasional shave really hurts. It's the time of year for big occasions, and yet there he is, suffering with that cheap drugstore razor. Let's help him out. Henson Shaving's line of razors, built with aerospace precision, deliver a smooth shave your dad, brother, and even son can enjoy, eventually. With replacement blades just 10 cents each, you'll buy it once, and they'll use it for life. How's that for the perfect gift? Celebrate with 100 free blades on your first purchase, and no subscription headaches. HensonShaving.com/holiday.
Hello and welcome to History for Weirdos.
We're your hosts, Andrew
and Stephanie.
And each week, we're going to take you on a journey into the strange, obscure, and relentlessly entertaining corners of human history.
Now listen up, friends, because it's about to get weird. Welcome to episode 62 of History for Weirdos.
Welcome back, weirdos. We're glad to have you.
Always glad to have you, and really excited for this week because I didn't have to do any research, and that's always fun.
I know, isn't it funny? That's always my least favorite part.
I know, like, researching is cool.
But the writing.
But putting it together in a way that will hopefully entertain people is the hard part.
It's like neither of us, like, that's not neither of our strong suits, but it's just like, it's one of those things where we really love this podcast, and it's even like the crappiest part of the podcast is still like amazing to do.
That's very true.
Yeah.
That's very true. Even the hard stuff is so worth it because we have this amazing community and this is always so fun to do. But I'm just a little bit biased for the weeks where I get to kind of sit back and it's like story time for me. And then I just get to react to the research.
And it's story time for you guys every week.
Yeah.
Except you guys do give us ideas.
Yes. We appreciate that so much. Your ideas are always welcome. You can email or message us on Instagram. The email is historyforweirdos@gmail.com, and we're on Instagram at historyforweirdos.
We prefer Instagram, just to be honest.
Yeah.
We're better at answering on Instagram. Not perfect, far from it, but better in general.
Yes. It's a work in progress.
Yeah, a work in progress.
We will get better, we promise. It's definitely a constant resolution, not even going to be a New Year's resolution. Yeah. But in addition to all of that, I did want to mention that you will notice a little change in or maybe a few changes in our show notes this week and moving forward. But the two changes that I wanted to bring up to you all is we have 2 affiliate links that we really thought about for this specific community and this audience. Number 1 affiliate link that you'll see is BarkBox, which was Stella insisted on it. Mm-hmm. She was like, I'm the mascot of the show. You guys need to rep me better. She loves BarkBox. We hope you and your furry love BarkBox as well. And then second is NordVPN, which is an amazing, amazing source to have a virtual private network. And that has a ton of benefits to it, but one of them being my favorite, which is that you can watch Netflix from different countries.
Right, exactly. So you can get their library, like if you live in the United States, you can get their English library, or even their Indian library if you so choose.
Yes, exactly.
So which is amazing because then it automatically just increases the content you can consume, which is, I guess, both a good and bad thing.
Yeah,
but I mean, yeah.
But it's also great for security and privacy purposes.
Right. I mean, that's like the point of it is that is that it provides like a great like security buffer. So it's way harder to get hacked, way harder to lose your information and data. So, which in today's day and age is of like paramount importance.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So we just wanted to share a little bit of that with you all. Like I said, if you're interested in either of those things, we use these services, and we have. Since we love them, we thought you all would love them, and we have links for those in the show notes. And like we said, these are affiliate links, but we just wanted you all to have access to that. And without further ado, Andrew, my love, it is your week. What are you going to tell us about?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the affiliate links. That was like the first thing that I had in my notes, so thank you.
Of course.
But weirdos, and Stephanie, you're a weirdo.
Exactly. I'm definitely one of the weirdos.
Definitely. We're going to continue the trend of covering spooky tales this week.
Yes.
This time, I will say this one's just more weird than spooky, but it's still a little bit spooky.
Okay.
Because it feeds into mass paranoia.
Dun, dun, oh, dun. Sick. That's great.
This time, the tale took place where we live in our hometown of Los Angeles, California, actually. And this was during the beginning of the U.S. involvement during World War II.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And before we can jump right into our story, we have to do just a little bit of background coverage first. So, December 7th, 1941. That date should just, should have just sirens going off in your head. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't, here's some brief coverage. This was the day that the Japanese Imperial Fleet attacked Pearl Harbor. The attack had major implications as this prompted the U.S. to enter World War II and eventually shift the tide of the conflict. Mm-hmm. One thing I do find interesting is how flawed and ultimately catastrophic the Japanese intelligence was for this attack. This is not really part of the story, but I was doing just a teeny bit of research on I was just like, of course I know what Pearl Harbor was, but I just want to do a little bit more research. And it was really interesting because, very long story short, they targeted battleships instead of aircraft carriers and other vessels, thinking that ultimately this war, especially the Pacific War, would come down to battleships, and it never really did.
Yeah.
This was ironic given that it would be the aircraft carriers, especially, that would push Japanese forces back in the Pacific theater and ultimately win the war for the U.S. and the Allies.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, very, very interesting, very flawed and strange tactics.
We just learned, obviously, about the tragedy portion of it, but not that it was a flawed strategy.
They had a very flawed strategy from the beginning, and even then, they targeted 8 battleships in Pearl Harbor, and 6 of them eventually were still good enough to fight.
Oh.
Yeah, so it was they sunk one was resurrected but never deployed. So it was pretty, thousands of Americans lost their lives, so that was, one thing. But it was more of they just rattled the hornet's nest as opposed to extinguishing the hornets,
Gosh, that's such a good way of saying it.
Yeah, I didn't even say that was actually a Japanese admiral that said that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But anywho, since the attack isn't really the topic of conversation of this episode, just more of a FYI, I'm not going to go into it any further than that. Just some random interesting food for thought.
And we should have this in our minds.
Yes, this in our minds, and this next thing is that there is another incident also that took place about 2.5 months after Pearl Harbor that just deserves a very quick mention. It was on the evening of February 23rd, 1942. A Japanese submarine shelled the Elwood oil field just about a dozen miles away from Santa Barbara, California. And the shelling did very, very minimal damage. There was less than $10,000 worth of damage in today's 2022 dollars.
Okay.
But it was intended more of a psychological attack.
It was just to rattle people?
Right. As this was the first time in over 100 years since the War of 1812 that a foreign power would attack the U.S. mainland.
Oh.
So it was a big deal.
That is a big deal.
It's a
That's
really big deal.
Interesting.
This was a big blow to the psyche of the American public.
Yeah.
And just served to terrify the populace.
Yeah.
So this brings us to the events of the following night, the topic of today's story.
Ooh.
Yes, and this was the evening of February 24th, 1942, Los Angeles, California. So that day, the Office of Naval Intelligence issued a warning that an attack on the U.S. West Coast was imminent, and that the attack from Japanese forces would commence sometime during the next 10 hours.
Okay.
Why they chose 10 hours, I don't know. An initial warning was issued at 7:18 p.m., and after hours of no activity, the warning was rescinded at 10:23 p.m. This is all in Pacific time, by the way. A few hours after that, in the early morning of February 25th, it really starts to hit the fan. And I'm just going to read a small excerpt from the Air Defense of the Western Hemisphere, which is a chapter of a book that I'll mention on later.
Okay.
It's a chapter is it's almost like a book within a book.
Oh, wow.
But the summary is really good and succinct. So, and this is in quotes, radars picked up an unidentified target 120 miles west of Los Angeles. Anti-aircraft batteries were alerted at 2:15 a.m. and were put on green alert, ready to fire a few minutes later. The Army Air Force kept its pursuit planes on the ground, preferring to await indications of the scale and direction of any attack before committing its limited fighter force. Radars tracked the approaching target to within a few miles of the coast, and at 2:21 a.m., the regional controller ordered a blackout. Thereafter, the information center was flooded with reports of enemy planes, even though the mysterious objects tracked in from the sea seemed to have vanished. At 2:43 a.m., planes were reported near Long Beach, and a few minutes later, a coast artillery colonel spotted about 25 planes at 12,000 feet over Los Angeles.
Oh, wow.
At 3:06 a.m., a balloon carrying a red flare was seen over Santa Monica, and 4 batteries of anti-aircraft artillery started to open fire, whereupon the air over Los Angeles erupted like a volcano.
What the phalanges?
I know, especially since you're from Santa Monica, I thought like that was interesting. They specifically mentioned Santa Monica as like with the aircraft or anti-aircraft batteries just like opening fire.
Wow. Also, Santa Monica, best place ever. If you haven't been, you should go.
I know. I think you're slightly biased. But anyways.
Okay, I'm really intrigued. What the hell was happening?
Yeah, just like you just sit back. I'm not going to say anything because I think the way this narrative unfolds is just like stranger and stranger. Basically, the Los Angeles Times wrote, "Powerful searchlights from countless stations stabbed the sky with brilliant probing fingers, while anti-aircraft batteries dotted the heavens with beautiful, if sinister, orange bursts of shrapnel."
Ooh, whoa.
I know, that was really good writing.
Very good writing.
Yeah. That LA Times person deserved a raise. I mean, they're dead by now, but, you know. Oh my gosh. The scene was utter chaos, yet many civilian eyewitnesses could not see anything in the sky except for anti-aircraft ordnance. However, others claimed that Japanese aircraft were flying in formation, dropping bombs, and even releasing paratroopers.
Okay, but there would be evidence of that.
I'll get to that. One report even stated that a downed Japanese aircraft crashed into the middle of Hollywood Boulevard.
Okay, definitely that would be pretty noticeable.
Yeah. Charles Patrick, a coastal artilleryman, wrote later in a memoir that, quote, "I could barely see the planes, but they were there all right. I could see 6 planes, and shells were bursting all around them. Naturally, all of us fellows were anxious to get our 2 cents worth in, and when the command came, everybody cheered like a son of a gun."
That's such an old man
I
thing
know.
to say.
And I was like a son of a gun. Get it?
Yeah.
Get it? Get it?
Because they're firing their guns.
Get it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, the shelling would continue on and off until 4:14 a.m. when a ceasefire was ordered, and then the all clear was finally issued at 7:21 a.m. on February 25th, 12 hours after the original warning was issued the night before.
Right. Which was in the next 10 hours something might happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So and that was within like the 10 hours basically. All in all, over 1,400 anti-aircraft shells were fired. 5 people even died during this attack. 3 from car accidents and 2 from heart attacks.
Oh,
but none from any Japanese bombardment.
Because it sounds like to me, it's just the U.S. Here in Los Angeles just shooting into the sky, right? Because they see lights. Is that it?
Well, we'll get to that in just a moment.
Okay. But that's so sad that the people died from car accidents.
Accidents and heart attacks.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So the incident made front page news nationwide because, of course, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And here's the startling thing, and you correctly assume this. After all of that, there was zero, and I mean zero evidence that the Japanese had any aircraft even remotely close to Los Angeles during this time.
Oh, shit.
Zero evidence. In fact, even after the war and Japan's unconditional surrender, they very explicitly stated that they never had any aircraft near LA at any point during the war, let alone during the night and morning of February 24th and 25th, respectively.
Right.
And they admitted to everything else. Like, they admitted everything. And they're like, nope, we had nothing.
Yeah. And at that point, you have nothing to lose by just saying that.
Exactly. And even the U.S. military, immediately after the incident, gave conflicting reports of what had actually happened. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox, for instance, dismissed the firefight as a false alarm brought on by, quote, jittery nerves, end quote.
By like everyone in Los Angeles?
Yeah, by thousands of people.
So he's without the term, he's essentially claiming like mass hysteria?
Pretty much, yeah.
Like everyone hallucinated the same thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, don't worry. We'll get to it. We'll get to like some
Jittery
analysis.
nerves.
Yeah. Also, Secretary of War Henry Stimson echoed other top army officials at the time, saying that there were at least 15 planes that had buzzed like the city. He even admitted the provocative theory that the Phantom fighters might have been commercial aircraft, quote, operated by enemy agents, end quote, hoping to strike fear into the public.
Okay, so Secretary of War and Secretary of the Navy, very different.
Very different stories.
Okay.
Secretary of War, by the way, is now the Secretary of Defense. That's just what it was called back then. He would even later backpedal his claims on this, but there were still thousands of military servicemen and civilian eyewitnesses who had claimed to see something. So according to the New York Times, some eyewitnesses had spied, quote, a big floating object resembling a balloon, end quote.
The balloon.
While others had spotted anywhere from one plane to several dozen planes.
Oh, gosh.
So this begs the question, what in the heck hooey caused this to happen?
Yeah.
So now, of course, I want this to be aliens because, it's history for weirdos after all. And, immediately after there is, and you can Google this, there is a LA Times front page picture of like at least like half a dozen spotlights illuminating one thing, and it looks to be like a flying saucer, but like one of those, but it's been quickly dismissed that it's not actually the case because they heavily during those times, like because they were all black and white photos, they would like heavily doctor it.
Oh yeah.
And so it's not like an actual like good representation of what the actual picture was.
Yeah.
And it's very blurry anyway, so it's kind of like you could say it is, but like it could also be like a million other things. Could be nothing. It's really hard to tell. It's so blurry. But sadly, I don't think that this is any case of extraterrestrial aircraft, and I'll get into more of it in a second. But before I go down that rabbit hole, I just want to point out that it's not like me saying like, oh, like I'm automatically discounting UFOs at all, right? And to be fair, there are very strange incidents that have occurred at other times in which there are no easy explanations. Obviously the one that comes to mind specifically is that UFO sighting in Western Michigan in March of 1994.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go into it, but if you want a really good recap of it, I suggest that you watch Season 3, Episode 2 of the show Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix, as they do a really good job covering it. And it gives like a 45-minute
They do a really good job. We love Unsolved Mysteries. The Netflix one, I've never seen the original show.
Yeah, me neither.
And that's like, I think because of that was what I initially thought of.
Right.
But that Michigan site is nuts. Totally go check it out, weirdos. You would love it.
I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Like, definitely not go down that rabbit hole, but it is really wild. And like, that is like, there's just no logical explanation. And the only thing that's even makes a remote sense is so wild that...
Yeah, basically what you're trying to say is we don't want the weirdos to think we don't believe in
Right.
extraterrestrial stuff.
Or even just like UFO stuff, right? There are some things that like, they literally like unidentified flying objects, right? It's just all that means is like it's unidentified. We don't know what it is. I'm not saying that it is extraterrestrial. It could be, but it could also not be. It could be something else. No idea. But anyways, all I'm saying is to point out that I don't automatically discount UFOs, but I don't believe this was the case here.
Boo!
I know. So what is the case here, Andrew?
You stink!
Yeah. Well, it's peculiar because it has to do with balloons. Weather balloons, to be specific.
What?
So decades later, in 1983, the U.S. Office of Air Force History concluded that an analysis of the evidence points to meteorological balloons as the case or as the cause of the initial alarm.
Wait, this was in 1983?
1983.
In 1983, they were still trying to figure out what had happened?
They finally figured it out, maybe. I don't know.
And it's balloons.
It is confirmed that these balloons had been released prior to the barrage to help determine wind conditions at the time. Their lights and silver color could have been what first triggered the alerts. And once the shooting began, the disorienting combination of searchlights, right? There's no other light pollution because there's a blackout.
Yeah.
So there's searchlights and the shooting of the anti-aircraft flak, along with the accompanying smoke, might have led gunners to believe that they were firing on enemy planes, even though there just wasn't anything there.
Okay.
So initial balloon spotted, people just start kind of going
Freaking out.
trigger finger happy. The spotlights is illuminating, the smoke and the anti-aircraft explosions. People are thinking like probably shadows from that are planes, and then it just causes more shooting.
Okay. Kind of like a snowball effect.
Right. And personally, I do think that seeing the anti-aircraft shells burst, illuminated by these searchlights at night in the very dark sky, could have been easily mistaken for enemy aircraft.
Okay.
I think it's very plausible that's the case. One story from Los Angeles reporter Matt Weinstock seems to have proven this story. He did an interview with one of the anti-aircraft personnel, and the gentleman had this to say about that night. And this is in quotes. Early in the war, things were pretty scary, and the Army was setting up coastal defenses. At one of the new radar stations near Santa Monica, the crew tried in vain to arrange for some planes to fly by so that they could test the system. As no one could spare planes at the time, they hit upon a novel way to test the radar. One of the guys bought a bag of nickel balloons and then filled them with hydrogen, attached metal wires, and let them go. Catching the offshore breeze, the balloons had the desired effect of showing up on the screens, proving this equipment was working. But after traveling a good distance offshore and to the south, the nightly onshore breeze started to push the balloons back towards the coastal cities. The coastal radar picked up the metal wires, and the searchlights swung automatically on the targets, looking on the screens as aircraft heading for the city. The AK started firing, and the rest was history. And I think the AK is the, the anti-aircraft guns.
Okay, so I was also... I know you're, really deep into the story, but I was going to clarify.
What?
An anti-aircraft is, a big gun?
It's like a real big gun.
Okay.
It's like one of those, during World War II, it's like sometimes you would see the guys seated down and they'd be pulling these levers, and this this massive kind of barrel moving along that's hand cranked, and then you just hear and what it would do is fire these. I know I'm doing, and you guys can't see this obviously,
he's really
but I'm
into it.
really into it, and I'm using my hands and stuff.
He cranked the machine and everything.
Exactly.
So then it goes.
It fires these massive shells, which then it also explode and release shrapnel.
Okay.
To to take down these planes.
This puts a lot more into context. I was like,
Yeah.
What's an anti-aircraft? Is it a little aircraft? Is it the
yes.
enemy of an aircraft?
Yeah, it's we don't like aircraft.
Yeah, but it's a gun, which
It's
I
a
guess is
big
an
gun.
enemy of an aircraft. It's a gun
Yeah.
that can take down a plane.
Exactly. That's
Okay.
exactly what it is. So, interestingly, though, this panic did inspire the Japanese to use the quote-unquote Fugo balloon bombs later in the war, but these did very little damage and ironically did not cause nearly the same level of fear as the Phantom balloon attack did on LA.
Oh.
So basically, if you don't know what I'm talking about, these were essentially these large hydrogen-based balloons that were laden with explosives and were released in Japan and floated for days across the Pacific to the mainland U.S. in order to start forest fires and cause panic.
Oh, yeah.
It
But
didn't
they didn't
work.
do a lot of damage.
It did very little damage. They released hundreds, I think, or maybe even thousands, and it did very little damage. And so, my dear weirdos, let me ask you this. Was the LA Panic, the Battle of Los Angeles as it's called, was this a case of balloons causing unnecessary panic, destruction, and deaths? Or was it aliens? You tell me.
The fact that it might be balloons is more absurd to me than aliens.
Yeah, and it's probably balloons, to be honest.
So in a
More than
way,
likely.
the Navy guy, the Secretary of the Navy, he
Yes.
was a little bit correct in thinking the jittery nerves, right?
Right.
It was such a high stress time that people were very quick to assume worst case scenario was happening.
Yeah, and I think he is in part correct, but also in part it was this was very early radar was being used, and people. I mean, I know for a fact that sometimes whales were mistaken on radar for like Japanese like submarines.
Oh my gosh.
So like, I mean, this like it was way off. So like there were tons of false positives, right?
That's interesting. I hadn't considered that context as well. I was like, well, can't they see what's up there? I guess not.
Right.
We take our very advanced technology for granted sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's the story of the Battle of Los Angeles, as it's called.
That's what it's called?
That's what, yeah, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek. There's even a movie made about, like, 10 years ago. It was terrible, but it was, like, an alien attack, and the movie is called The Battle of Los Angeles. And they attack Los Angeles, unsurprisingly. I would not recommend watching it, but it was based off this event, like, in a weird sort of way.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I'm sure people in LA, I mean, was LA super populated in the 40s?
I mean, sort of, but not like it is today.
Obviously not like it is today, but relatively for the time.
I think by the, I don't really know. I know by the, in the 20s, it like was, that's when it started like blowing up, but I don't think it hit a, I don't know. It like, yes and no. I think it was definitely like decently populated, but not like. Because
today, obviously, it's very highly populated, so it is unfortunately an area that would be targeted,
right,
because of how densely populated it is. And obviously at that time, with the threat of the Japanese government and everything,
right,
I think it makes sense that people were scared.
Exactly. I also think it's kind of ironic too that it's like it happened here in LA, where like the motion picture like industry really started. Yeah, and like it's kind of like it was all an illusion, just like how movies are all an illusion.
Because we're all so dramatic.
Oh, dun dun dun!
Wow, that was really interesting. Definitely a perfect story for History for Weirdos.
I know, right?
Because it got even weirder when it's like, aliens? No, big balloons in the sky.
Yeah, no, weather balloons. Like, it's so absurd.
I'm definitely...
People died because of this. Because of weather
so
balloons,
sad.
maybe. Or, like, nickel-plated balloons. I don't even know what that means.
I'm absolutely going to post a picture of, like, a 1940s weather balloon on our Instagram.
Definitely.
Because we all must see what these look like.
Absolutely. As you should. As you should. As we should. But anyways, the sources for this week's episode, a really interesting book called The Army Air Forces in World War II, Volume 1 by William Gross, History.com, the California Library, the LA Times, and of course our favorite, Wikipedia.
That's awesome, babe. Thank you so much for sharing this story.
Absolutely.
And thank you, weirdos, as always, for listening. I have said this before, but I will say it again. Please share this episode with another weirdo that you think might enjoy it, or leave us a review or a rating. It helps the episode, or the podcast, grow. And you all have helped us grow so much, so thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, weirdos. Until next time.
Until next time.
We all know a guy who only occasionally shaves for big occasions, and it's because that occasional shave really hurts. It's the time of year for big occasions, and yet there he is, suffering with that cheap drugstore razor. Let's help him out. Henson Shaving's line of razors, built with aerospace precision, deliver a smooth shave your dad, brother, and even son can enjoy, eventually. With replacement blades just 10 cents each, you'll buy it once, and they'll use it for life. How's that for the perfect gift? Celebrate with 100 free blades on your first purchase, and no subscription headaches. HensonShaving.com/holiday.
Las ciberofertas de JCPenney están a solo un clic hasta el martes. Encuentra ahorros en jcp.com y acaba con tu lista de regalos, con miles de ofertas como hasta 60% de descuento en mantas térmicas y decorativas, o ropa de invierno para todos desde $14.99. Consiente a esa persona especial con joyería con diamantes y piedras preciosas Yes Please a solo $19.99. JCPenney, celebraciones que valen la pena. Ofertas válidas en selección de estilos hasta el 28 de noviembre, solo en línea. Aplican exclusiones. Las ciberofertas se excluyen de los cupones. Detalles en jcp.com.